Hi, buddy. It's Jeff here. Another one of the chapters, I guess, in this video tutorial series on quality assessment of. On this one, it will be very specifically about language industry topics. Just because there's a really difference. Well, there is a differences between text and speech, and I want to deal with the differences here on kind of the combinations because sometimes you can deal with there are different things in other kinds of data, telecom data, and other kinds of data, business intelligence data, enterprise data. Those can be tested in different ways, and the metrics can be different. But some of the things that you have to consider in dealing with language data, and that's textual data versus speech data, because those are different types of data, and you can have different types of variations of them compared to other data like in telecom data. We would have, when we have specifications, we have data samples of the specifications like 3GPP telecom data. You'd always want the samples of the data that would be running through on for your running your mobile phone, and the handshakes that happen on the mobile phone to get the call and how to get the connection and all that, and the samples of the specifications about that. That's all pretty binary. Let's call it that way. It's either works, it's on or off. It's 0 1. But language is so different because you have so many different phonological things. So we've already talked about the prototype things. So I want to. This is how the prototype of. I mentioned about the prototype, the prototype semantics approach to morphology and syntax. That's the written stuff, right? And then there's a prototype semantics with regard to phonology and phonetics. So that's the spoken part, right? And so what I want to do is kind of combine those right now and say, how does this approach to, how do you deal with this when you're dealing with speech versus text, written text and read speech or writing, and then how do you speak that? And if you got read speech when they're speaking out, like here I'm talking naturally, but what if I start reading, a script, right? I'm going to be reading it differently because I want to read everything's in the script, right? And I have written the script, so it needs to sound formal, right? Or kind of informal or less formal. But natural speech, it's always informal unless you want to make it sound very formal, right? So this is really important. So some of the things that you've got that you will find in the differences between natural speech and, let's say, unscripted natural speech, which I'm doing right here, versus scripted speech, which will be read speech. Um, I've got a lot of filler words, right? So people complain and say, Jeff, you're saying okay, okay, okay all the time. Well, yeah, okay, I'm saying okay because I'm doing a checklist in my mind of what I need in my checklist as I'm going through. Did I finish that idea? Okay? And I go on. This is just normal, natural speech. And some people have said, like in my music stuff, I do a lot of music reviews, and they say, Jeff, if we had a beer for every time you said okay, we'd be drunk. Well, it's unscripted speech. Okay, so just accept it. That's we do this all the time. We do. If I had to say, if we get a beer for every I said, a filler word, boy, we'd all be drunk because that's what actually unscripted speech is. People are expecting scripted speech in some online videos, whereas people say with it, YouTubers, they don't care. Now what they do is they'll go to and they'll cut the little ums out, right? They cheat, okay, because they're doing they everyone does and those are the ones that you know about, right? Let's talk about, but see, this is called linguistic economy. And linguistic economy is you try to make the least amount of sounds as possible while you're speaking because it's easier to pronounce rather than long sequences of syllables, right? Because long sequences of syllables and very complicated terms are hard to pronounce. So that's why read speech is hard to read and to say out loud because it's got lots of words that aren't spoken, they're written. The more you write and the more you revise text, the farther away you get from spoken speech. That's that is a big. And some people think, well, written is like the reference. No, spoken is the reference, and written is the abnormal. Okay, we need to accept this. It's the abnormal. So it's really important to understand this when you're doing any kind of measurements and data of whatever you're going to do. So some of the examples we've got here are in spoken speech, natural conversational speech. You will get lots of examples, and if you want to see the difference of this, look at the difference between formal letters, and then emails became the informal text, right? And now that's become the formal text. Emails are now the formal text, what used to be the informal text compared to written letters, right? So emails now become the formal reference. Then we got SMS messages, right, and WhatsApp chats, and Slack and chat and whatever, and Messenger this and Facebook Messenger that and WhatsApp and I mean all this stuff. These are all just, and can you put the emojis in, the emoticons, emojis in that, and can you abbreviations? Remember back when we had telephones that I don't have it here. I do. I actually got my phone somewhere. I have an old dinosaur phone that had the buttons, and you do it, and you only had allowed to do 120 characters for each text message, right? You had to pay for each text message, so you do abbreviations, right? You do that, and you try to repeat it, and it was so hard to actually. You had to go 1 2 3, that, and 1 2 1 2 3, and you had to actually type it. You didn't have a real keyboard, so you didn't want to type because you had to push the buttons all the time to get the letter right. So you do abbreviations because it took so long to say to write up the word, right? And because you had a certain amount of characters that you pay for each message, right? So, because it was each message got paid 15 cents per message, right? Those combinations just people made shorter sentence, or they abbreviated words, right? So that creates what we called SMS jargon, right? so this is that's a very specific type of jargon, right? Sorry, I got the noise here. So these are examples of certain types of text, certain types of corpora. But you've also got natural speech. It's going to have the similar types of things, but not that way, because that's a controlled language in written text that you'd normally speak, but you're not, because you can't speak because you're not calling, right? But in normal spoken speech, you're going to have other things. And what you can find examples of spoken speech in written text is in comic books and in comic strips in the newspaper, right? And you see in the bubbles that the people are saying, you see different written forms of shortened versions that reflect how the pronunciation is, okay? And that's why it's so funny. That's where comic books are funny and comic strips are so funny, because it's the written form, but it's not the written form, because it's the spoken form. Spoken form is the basis, right? Written form is actually after. No one learns to write, okay, when they're born, okay? They learn to speak, right? You only start learning to write when you're going 5 years old and you start going to school, right? So, but we've all got this wrong, okay? We think that written text is the reference. It is not the reference. We need to accept text is not the reference. How many times I have to say this? Spoken speech is the reference. But the problem is that we try to make ourselves sound formal, moving away from normal spoken speech. That's why Trump was everybody loved him in America, because he's not he's just saying what's on, he's walking down the street and I'm saying it out loud, right? He was kind of giving an example of what spoken speech is and how people do spoken speech all the time. Whereas politicians, they all scrub their speech, right? They scrub it. They have 25 people writing their script for them, so you get this in a teleprompter, right? That's not natural speech, okay? We should not use politicians and their speeches as the example of natural speech, because it's not natural speech. It's as far away from natural speech as you can get, because it's been scrubbed. It's been read. It's been written to be read, not to be heard. Okay, well, it's written to be heard, but it's so far away from natural speech. Okay, so when we understand this, then we understand how to measure it, right? So go look at comic strips and go read in all the comic books and the comic strips. With your kids and stuff, well, adults too. Some of us are like adult kids, right? That's where the writers of that understand spoken speech. They understand what's spoken, and they know how to write spoken speech, right? Spoken dialogue. or when you go and look at dialogue analysis, discourse analysis, people are actually analyzing the discourse and they write it exactly as it sounds. They write it as it sounds in regular words rather than phonetic alphabet, right? As close you're going to get is phonetic alphabet, or doing transcripts when you're writing transcripts out of the spoken speech. I've done that. All of my doctoral, all my interviews for my doctoral work were all. I had to actually get the things, do the context, get them to all talk, and then I'd find the sentences that I was looking for because I was trying to guide them through a discussion to find certain sentences that had certain words I was looking for. But I was trying to do it in natural speech, and so then I identified that, and I'd transcribe those sentences into phonetics, and then I had my examples, right, and then I transcribed that, the phonetics, into the written text so that people could read it who didn't know how to read phonetics, right? IPA, right? International Phonetic Alphabet. So these are examples of, it's really important to understand this difference. Text is not the reference, okay? It's an evolved life form, okay? Text is an evolved life form of speech. And so, yeah, we got to beat this down in our minds, okay? But the problem is that corpora is all text, right? Well, a lot of corpora is text. And so we think that it's the reference. It's not the reference, okay? Spoken speech and natural discourse, natural stuff is the reference. And it's hard to get, and it's hard to transcribe it because it takes so much time, right? So, I would say here is, the things I'm going to put in other videos after this one right here. I want you to watch a few more videos I've done, okay? I want you to go and watch the video that I did on the Diplomat project, where I explain the entire project, how we did it for text and speech, because we're doing speech-to-speech systems. I have one video that explains the overall project and how we did the corpora data creation, both speech and text. And then I have one specific video just on how we did the actual speech data collection, because that was cooler, okay? Way more cool. I mean, it was way intense. Really fun how we did it, and low budget, and real field work. Just real field work. And I'm not going to go through. I mean, like, you got to put mattresses in windows because they're in their fourth floor and there's no windows in the entire building. You can hear the cars honking and the roosters going cock-a-doodle-doo in the mornings, right? And so you can hear all this noise. And it's 40 degrees Celsius outside, and it's hot. But you got to put the fan on the room to have people you don't want the computers to melt and the people to die while you're doing the recordings. You don't want to pass out, right? So that creates extra noise, right? So, and you got to deal with all this stuff. So that's just the idea to whet your appetite to go watch those videos, because those I talk about those challenges. So the whole Carnegie Mellon Diplomat project, and then the Diplomat project speech data collection one, I'm going to put those in the playlist right now here, and I want you to read those to get an idea of the things that you need to be able to have clean for corpora and what you need to be able to measure. And this is really important as you begin to determine what are the things you want to keep and what are the things you not want to keep. And like what we did is, when you do things, I talked about how we did the recordings. Every single sentence you validated, and you removed it at that point, in or out, get rid of it, redo it, get rid of it, redo it. That's how you do it. Really controlled corpus for a specific purpose, right? Whereas you can have natural conversation. I mentioned the thing too, where we tried that, but it's like takes 12 hours to type the thing or retranscribe it, which is way too much time, and you end up with a project that's going to cost in the millions, which we don't have. So that whole project gives a good example of how you can do controlled situations, controlled speech data campaigns to be able to do it, right? So go watch those two videos. I'll put them in the playlist, and you'll deal with it, right? And then I'll talk about some, let's see, do I have any other ones? I'll do another chapter here and another topic here. But these are really important to understand to be able to what you're going to be measuring for. Because you really need to know what you want to do with your corpus. And you have to determine that up front. And you need to determine when you create the corpus, speech or text, you need to be able to focus on getting it right. If you want to everything in it, it won't work, because then, if you want it to be all purpose, You need to cut it down and use pieces of it to make it work for whatever you want to do with it. Um, it really needs to be kind of thought through carefully. So that's this video. Go watch those other two videos that will follow, and I'll do some other videos here and other topics there.